I've always believed in paying attention to details. The small things, like the way a person shifts in their chair when they lie, or how their eyes dart away at the wrong moment. The way a smile can be too perfect, too rehearsed. It's a skill I picked up over time, mostly as a survival mechanism. And this morning, as I sat at my sister-in-law Caroline's dining table for our monthly family brunch, that skill was screaming at me. Jessica, my wife, placed a steaming cup of coffee in front of me. Her lips curved into that sweet, effortless smile she had perfected over the years. "Made you a special coffee, honey," she said, her voice smooth as silk. Now, I don't claim to be a coffee connoisseur, but I know how coffee should smell. I know the deep, earthy aroma, the rich bitterness that fills the air before you even take a sip. This was different. The second the steam hit my nose, something twisted in my gut. There was an underlying scent, faint but unmistakable, metallic. I didn't react, didn't let my face betray a single flicker of suspicion. Instead, I picked up the cup, swirling the dark liquid gently, pretending to appreciate her effort. "How sweet," I murmured, offering a small smile in return. Jessica's eyes flickered, just for a second, barely noticeable, unless you were looking, unless you knew what to look for. Across the table, Caroline stirred her own coffee lazily, her long nails tapping against the porcelain. She always played the role of the casual observer, watching, waiting, pretending she wasn't in on whatever was happening behind the scenes. I had learned the hard way that with these two, nothing was ever casual. Over the past year, I'd been sick more times than I could count. Stomach pains that kept me doubled over in bed. Nausea so intense I could barely stand. Emergency room visits with doctors scratching their heads, unable to explain why my body was betraying me. And always, it happened after a meal prepared by Jessica or during one of these brunches at Caroline's house. Coincidence? Maybe once. Maybe twice. Not this many times. I had theories, of course. Wild, twisted suspicions that any sane man would dismiss. But I'd learned that ignoring the signs didn't make them disappear. So today, I had a plan. I reached for my phone, pretending to check a message. Then, with a perfectly timed stumble, I bumped the table, just enough to make the cups clatter, just enough to create a moment of chaos. "Ah, damn," I muttered, steadying myself. Jessica's hand shot out, her fingers gripping the table's edge. A natural reaction, maybe, but her eyes went straight to my coffee cup. Not me. The cup. That told me everything I needed to know. As I straightened, I reached out, switching my coffee with Caroline's. It was quick, effortless. The kind of move you learn after years of playing defense in a game you never signed up for. Caroline barely glanced up, too absorbed in whatever she was typing on her phone. Jessica, though? She noticed. She recovered quickly, forcing another smile. But I saw the moment of hesitation, the way her throat worked as she swallowed. "Careful, honey," she said, her voice light. "Don't be too clumsy. Wouldn't want you spilling that special coffee I made just for you." I chuckled, lifting the new cup to my lips, pretending to sip. The scent still lingered in the air, twisting my stomach into knots. But now, it wasn't my problem anymore. I placed the cup back on the table, watching, waiting. 30 minutes. That's all it would take. Caroline didn't know it yet, but she was about to become the proof I needed. The proof that my own wife was trying to poison me. 30 minutes. That's all it took. I sat there, calm and patient, watching as Caroline's fingers trembled slightly around the handle of the coffee cup. At first, it was subtle, barely noticeable, just a slight hesitation in her grip. But I saw it. I saw everything. Jessica sat beside me, her body stiff despite the relaxed smile she kept plastered on her face. She was watching too, though she tried to pretend otherwise. Every few seconds, her gaze flicked toward me, then toward Caroline, then back to me again, like she was expecting something to happen. The only problem? It wasn't happening to me. Caroline let out a breath, shifting in her seat. She rubbed her fingers against her temple like she was trying to shake off a headache. "Ugh," she muttered under her breath. "I feel weird." Jessica turned her head sharply, her smile faltering for just a second. "Weird how?" Caroline frowned, blinking a few times. Her normally sharp eyes looked unfocused, like she was struggling to keep up with the conversation. Just off. My hands feel tingly, she murmured, flexing her fingers. And my stomach. Jessica's fingers curled around the edge of the table. Her knuckles were turning white. Maybe it's just the heat, she said quickly, forcing a chuckle. Or maybe you didn't eat enough this morning. I leaned back, resting my arm casually along the chair, pretending to be oblivious. Inside, my pulse was pounding. I knew that reaction. I'd lived it too many times. The nausea that starts as a pit in your stomach, spreading like an invisible sickness. The dizziness that makes the world tilt slightly, just enough to disorient you. The tingling in the fingers, the sudden weakness in the limbs. I'd felt all of it before. And now, Caroline was feeling it. I glanced down at the coffee cup in front of me, the one that should have been mine. It was still untouched, the steam curling lazily into the air. That strange metallic scent still lingered, taunting me. Jessica's hand reached toward her own cup, but she didn't drink from it. She was watching, waiting. I saw the moment realization hit her. Her breath hitched, her back straightened, and for just a second, just a fraction of a second, her eyes widened in horror before she masked it. Oh, she knew. She knew. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't just paranoia on my part. She had planned this. She had expected me to drink that coffee. And now, as she watched Caroline's body betray her, the weight of her mistake was sinking in. The coffee was poisoned, and she had poisoned it. My own wife. I turned to Caroline, studying her carefully. Her breathing had quickened slightly, and her fingers were now gripping the table as if to steady herself. Her usually sharp tongue had been replaced by sluggish confusion. What exactly did you put in that coffee, Jess? I asked, keeping my voice light, casual. Jessica flinched. What? Caroline doesn't look too good. I gestured to her sister, who was now pressing a hand against her stomach. And it's strange, because that's exactly how I've felt. Oh, let's say the last 5 times I've had a meal at your sister's house. Jessica laughed, but it was forced, too high-pitched. Nathan, that's ridiculous. Is it? I tilted my head. Because I've been hospitalized, 3 times in the last 6 months? All with symptoms no one could explain. And now, I don't drink the coffee, but Caroline does, and suddenly, she's sick? That's quite the coincidence, don't you think? Jessica's throat bobbed as she swallowed. You're being paranoid. Caroline let out a soft groan, rubbing her forehead. Jessica. Her voice was quieter now, almost breathless. What was in that coffee? Jessica's mask cracked. It was brief, barely a flicker, but I saw it. A glimpse of something raw, something panicked. Caroline, don't be ridiculous. It's just coffee, she snapped, a little too defensively. Caroline blinked up at her, her face pale. No, I said, standing up slowly. It's not just coffee. And you know that, don't you, Jessica? Her eyes darted toward me, then toward Caroline, then back again. Trapped. I pulled my phone from my pocket, unlocking it with a quick swipe of my finger. The recording app had been running since the moment she set that cup in front of me. See, here's what's going to happen, I said evenly, my voice carrying across the table. I'm going to call an ambulance. Caroline is going to get the medical attention she needs. And then, I'm going to make sure they run a full toxicology screen. Jessica's hands clenched into fists. You're blowing this out of proportion, she hissed. Am I? I raised a brow. Then why do you look like you just saw a ghost? She didn't answer. Caroline exhaled shakily. Jessica. Her voice trembled, her fingers pressing against her chest. Tell me the truth. Did you put something in that coffee? Jessica's lips parted, but no words came out. She didn't need to say it. Her silence was the answer. I pressed the call button. 911. What's your emergency? Yes, I said, my voice steady. I need an ambulance at 1207 Willow Creek Drive. My sister-in-law appears to be having a severe reaction to something in her coffee. Jessica's breath hitched. She had lost control of the situation. And now? Now, it was my turn to see how far this would go. The moment I hung up with 911, The air in the dining room grew suffocatingly thick. Jessica's face had lost all its color, her fingers clenched into trembling fists at her sides. Caroline groaned, her forehead damp with sweat, gripping the edge of the table like she was trying to anchor herself to reality. I watched Jessica carefully. She was too quiet, not rushing to Caroline's side, not trying to comfort her, not showing the panic of a loving sister watching her sibling suffer. No, she was calculating. Her mind was working overtime, trying to figure out how to talk her way out of this. I wasn't going to give her the chance. You were never expecting me to make this call, were you? I said, my voice calm but firm. You thought I'd be the one slumped over this table, too dizzy to think, too weak to fight back. Jessica flinched, her lips pressing into a tight line. You're being ridiculous, she muttered, but her voice lacked conviction. This is just, Caroline probably just has a low tolerance for caffeine. I let out a humorless laugh. Right, because caffeine poisoning looks exactly like the symptoms I had last month. In the month before that. In the month before that. Jessica's nostrils flared. Nathan, stop it. I took a slow step toward her, lowering my voice. No, you stop it. No more gaslighting. No more brushing things off. I know what's been happening to me. And now, so does she. I gestured toward Caroline, who was now visibly shaking. And guess what, Jessica? You made a mistake today. You tried to poison me again. And now, the wrong person drank it. So tell me, what was in that coffee? Jessica's eyes darted toward the front door, as if she was considering bolting. That's when Caroline, her breath coming in sharp gasps, spoke. Jess, what did you do? Jessica whipped her head toward her sister, her panic morphing into something sharper, something almost desperate. Nothing. I didn't do anything, she snapped. Then why do you look so scared? I asked, tilting my head. You should be worried about Caroline right now, right? But you're not. You're worried about something else. Jessica turned to me, her eyes dark and frantic. Nathan, just think for a second. Why would I ever try to hurt you? I took another step forward. That's the question, isn't it? Caroline let out a shaky breath, her fingers curling weakly against the table. Oh my God, she whispered, realization dawning on her face. The board meeting. Jessica froze. And there it was, the crack in her armor. I felt something cold settle in my chest. I had suspected, but now, I knew. Caroline's voice was weak, but her words cut through the tension like a blade. That's why, isn't it? That's why you've been doing this to Nathan. She lifted her head, eyes glassy but filled with betrayal. You wanted him out of the way. Jessica clenched her jaw. You don't know what you're talking about. Caroline let out a bitter, rasping chuckle. Oh, I think I do. She turned to me, eyes flickering with something I hadn't expected, guilt. Nathan, I should have seen it. I should have known. I frowned. Known what? She swallowed hard. Jessica's been after your position at work for months. I exhaled slowly, my fingers curling into fists. Of course, the Henderson account, the biggest client of the year. The contract that had the potential to change everything. And I was leading the pitch. Jessica worked at the same firm, but she'd been struggling to land major accounts. She was good at what she did, but she didn't have the reputation I had built over the years. And Henderson? They had requested me personally. She must have seen it as a threat. She must have thought I was in her way. Caroline's voice was thick with regret. She kept saying how unfair it was that you were stealing opportunities from her. How she was the one who deserved to be handling the firm's biggest clients. She let out a breathless, humorless laugh. I thought it was just talk. I didn't know she'd actually. Her voice broke off with a pained shudder. Jessica's hands were trembling now. It wasn't supposed to be like this, she whispered. I stared at her. What wasn't supposed to be like this? She looked up at me, something raw and desperate in her eyes. You weren't supposed to figure it out. A cold, empty silence stretched between us. You were just supposed to miss the meeting, she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. Just one meeting. Just one. So they'd think you were unreliable. So they'd let me take the lead instead. Her voice cracked. But you kept bouncing back. No matter what I did, You kept showing up. And then they gave you the next big account. And then the next. And the next. Her breath came in short, angry gasps. Do you know what it's like to work twice as hard, only to be overlooked again and again? She snapped, her voice rising. To have everything you deserve handed to someone else? I stared at her in disbelief. Deserve? You think you deserve my job? Jessica's face twisted with something ugly. Yes, she spat. I do. Because I work just as hard as you. But nobody ever notices me when you're in the room. I'm always just Jessica. Just another employee. Just your wife. Asterisk. She let out a shaky breath. I thought if you got sick just once, just one time, I'd finally get my chance. My stomach turned. Caroline let out a wheezing, pained laugh. Well, congratulations, she croaked. You got your chance. And now, you're going to prison for it. Jessica's face twisted in panic. Caroline, no. I didn't mean for this to happen. Shut up, I snapped, my voice like ice. Jessica flinched. I pulled my phone out again, tapping the screen. I recorded everything, I said coldly. You just confessed to poisoning me. Her eyes went wide. No, I didn't. I didn't mean. Doesn't matter, I interrupted. You said it. And the police are already on their way. Jessica's face twisted into something I barely recognized. A mixture of rage, panic, and sheer disbelief. You, she started, but the distant sound of sirens cut her off. Her head snapped toward the window, her hands shaking violently now. Caroline exhaled shakily. You're done, Jess, she whispered. It's over. And for the first time since this nightmare started, Jessica realized she had lost. The sirens grew louder, and Jessica's breath quickened. She looked like a cornered animal, eyes darting toward the front door, the windows, the hallway, anywhere that could offer an escape. But there was nowhere to run. I didn't take my eyes off her as I stood by Caroline's side, gripping my phone like it was my lifeline. Because right now, it was. A moment later, the paramedics burst through the front door, their voices brisk and professional as they moved toward Caroline. What are her symptoms? One of them asked, already kneeling beside her. She's dizzy, weak, nauseous. I listed, stepping back to give them space. Her hands have been shaking. She's having trouble keeping her balance. Caroline groaned as one of the medics checked her pulse, then flashed a light into her eyes. Her pupils are dilated, he murmured to his colleague. Possible toxic reaction. Jessica stood frozen in place, watching with wide eyes. Ma'am, the paramedic turned to her. Do you know what she's ingested? Jessica's mouth opened and closed. No words came out. I do, I said calmly. She drank my coffee, the one my wife made specifically for me. The paramedic glanced at Jessica, his face unreadable. Do you know what was in it? Jessica's lips trembled. I just made regular coffee, she whispered. I pulled out my phone and pressed play on the recording. Jessica's confession echoed through the room. You were just supposed to miss the meeting. Just one. So they'd think you were unreliable. The paramedic's head snapped up. His expression shifted immediately. What had been neutral concern turned to something much more serious. We need to get her to the hospital now. Two medics lifted Caroline onto a stretcher as she whimpered in pain. I'll ride with her, I said quickly. Jessica took a step toward me, her face pale. Nathan. I turned on my heel and walked away, leaving her standing there as the police car pulled into the driveway. The ride to the hospital was tense. Caroline's breathing was shallow, and every few minutes, she shivered violently despite the blanket wrapped around her. I sat beside her, watching helplessly as the medics administered oxygen, monitoring her vitals. Nathan, her voice was faint. You knew, didn't you? I swallowed. I had my suspicions. She let out a weak, bitter laugh. Guess we both learned the hard way. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. The moment we arrived at the hospital, nurses rushed her into a treatment room while a doctor peppered me with questions. What she ate, what she drank, when the symptoms started. I told them everything. Then I handed over my phone. I recorded her admitting to it. I told the attending physician. Check Caroline's toxicology report. I'd bet my life this isn't the first time my wife has done this. The doctor's expression darkened. We'll run every test necessary. 2 hours passed. I sat in the waiting room, my hands clasped together, my thoughts spiraling. I replayed everything in my head. The months of illness, the lies, the dismissals, the careful way Jessica had orchestrated it all. The pieces fit too well. She had planned this. Every single step of it. She hadn't just wanted me to miss one meeting. That had been the start. But when that failed, she had escalated. Each time, the symptoms grew worse. She had been slowly pushing, testing, seeing how far she could go without getting caught. And now, finally, she had gone too far. A door swung open, pulling me from my thoughts. Dr. Phillips, a tall woman with sharp eyes and silver-streaked hair, walked toward me. "She's stable," she said without preamble. "We were able to flush most of the toxins from her system. She's weak, but she'll recover." I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "And?" Dr. Phillips studied me for a moment. "You were right to be concerned. The toxicology report confirmed the presence of a non-lethal but highly potent compound, one that shouldn't be in any food or drink. We're running further analysis, but the initial results are alarming." My jaw clenched. "How alarming?" She hesitated, then handed me a tablet. The screen showed a list of chemical compounds, medical terms I barely understood, except for one word. "Rodenticide?" I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Phillips nodded grimly. "A slow-acting poison often used in pest control. In small doses over time, it causes fatigue, nausea, muscle weakness, but in concentrated amounts?" She met my gaze. "It could be fatal." My stomach churned. She hadn't just been trying to sabotage me. She had been trying to kill me. "Would you be willing to speak with law enforcement?" the doctor asked. I let out a slow breath. "I already have evidence. And I'm not stopping until she pays for what she's done." Dr. Phillips nodded, as if she had expected nothing less. Just then, a voice broke through the hospital's quiet hum. "Nathan." I turned, and there she was. Jessica, standing at the entrance of the waiting room, her hair slightly disheveled, her breathing uneven. 2 uniformed police officers flanked her, their hands resting on their holsters. "Don't say a word," one of them instructed. Jessica's eyes locked onto mine, filled with something I couldn't quite decipher. Fear? Desperation? Remorse? "I didn't mean to," she whispered. My blood ran cold. The officer nearest to her stepped forward. "Nathan Bennett, we'll need a formal statement from you." I stood up, leveling my gaze at my wife. The woman I had once trusted. The woman who had loved me, or at least pretended to. "Don't worry," I said, voice steady. "I'm ready to talk." Jessica's lips parted, as if she wanted to plead, beg, but she knew. She had already lost. The officer turned to her. "Jessica Bennett, you're under arrest for attempted poisoning, reckless endangerment, and conspiracy to commit harm." The words echoed through the hallway. Jessica inhaled sharply. "Nathan." I held up a hand. "Don't. Just don't." Her face crumbled. I turned away from her as the officers led her down the hall, their footsteps heavy against the tile floor. Dr. Phillips placed a hand on my shoulder. "This isn't over yet," she murmured. I nodded. No, it wasn't over. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't the one at risk. Jessica was. And she was going to pay for what she had done. The hospital's fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above me as I walked into the small, sterile interrogation room. The walls were painted a dull beige, the air heavy with an unsettling stillness. Across the metal table, Jessica sat, her wrists handcuffed, her posture stiff. She looked different. Not just physically, though the stress of the last few hours had certainly taken its toll. Her hair was messier than I'd ever seen it, her eyes rimmed with exhaustion. But it was something deeper. For the first time in our marriage, she looked small. Jessica had always been calculated, always controlled. She was the kind of woman who never let a single strand of hair fall out of place, who could walk into a room and command attention with a single glance. But now, she was sitting in a police interrogation room, waiting to hear just how much of her life was about to collapse. I sat down across from her, folding my hands on the table. She didn't meet my gaze. "Why, Jessica?" I asked, my voice low but firm. Her shoulders tensed. "Don't act like you don't know," she muttered, still refusing to look at me. "I want to hear it from you." Jessica let out a breath, sharp, shaky. "I already told you. It wasn't supposed to be like this." I scoffed. "Oh, right. You only meant to make me sick, not kill me. That makes it so much better." She flinched at the sarcasm in my voice, but I didn't care. "I need to understand," I continued, my tone even. "I need to know how the woman I married, the woman I loved, could do something like this." Finally, she lifted her eyes. And for a brief moment, I saw it. The flicker of something beneath the cold calculation. Regret? Shame? Or just the horror of getting caught? Jessica inhaled slowly. "Do you know what it's like, Nathan?" she asked softly. "What?" "To be invisible," she whispered. I frowned. "Jessica, what the hell are you talking about?" She let out a bitter laugh. "You don't get it. You never had to get it. Everything has always been so easy for you." Her gaze sharpened, her fingers curling into fists. "You walk into a room, and people listen to you. They respect you. They want to work with you. Meanwhile, I've spent years busting my ass at that company, and no one ever saw me." I exhaled through my nose, keeping my emotions in check. "So you decided to poison me? That was your solution?" Jessica clenched her jaw. "It wasn't supposed to go this far." "You keep saying that." I leaned forward. "But it did." Her throat bobbed as she swallowed hard. "I just wanted a chance. A real chance. But every time I thought I had an opportunity, you were there. Taking every promotion, every major client, every account I worked twice as hard for." Her voice wavered. "So yeah, at first, I just wanted you to slow down. Just enough for people to finally see me." I shook my head in disbelief. "You don't sabotage people you love, Jessica." She blinked rapidly, as if my words had struck her, but she didn't deny it. "You know what the worst part is?" I asked, my voice growing rough. "I trusted you. Even when I started getting sick, I never wanted to believe that it could be you." Jessica's face twisted, her jaw tightening. "And yet, you did." I narrowed my eyes. "Because the truth was impossible to ignore. You made sure of that." Silence stretched between us, thick with all the things left unsaid. Then, quietly, Jessica spoke again. "And Caroline?" I tilted my head. "What about her?" She let out a slow breath. "Is she going to be okay?" For the first time since this started, Jessica looked genuinely afraid. Not for herself, but for Caroline. "She's stable," I said carefully. "But she could have died, Jessica." Her lips parted slightly, her hands trembling against the table. "She wasn't supposed to drink it," she murmured, almost to herself. "It was never meant for her." I leaned forward. "And I was never supposed to figure it out. But here we are." Jessica's gaze met mine, and for the first time, I saw real remorse in her expression. But it wasn't enough. Not even close. "Do you regret it?" I asked. She exhaled sharply. "Getting caught?" "Yes." I let out a cold laugh, shaking my head. "Of course. Because if I had just gone along with it, if I had kept drinking whatever you put in front of me, I'd still be sick. You'd still be winning. Right?" Jessica didn't answer. That's what I thought. Another long silence passed. Then Jessica took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. "I should talk to my lawyer," she muttered. I stared at her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Yeah, you should." I stood up, pushing the chair back. Jessica's eyes flickered with something. Maybe she had expected me to say more. Maybe she had hoped for some kind of absolution. But I wasn't offering it. Not after everything. "I'm done, Jessica." My voice was firm, unwavering. "You made your choices. Now you have to live with them." She didn't argue, didn't beg. She just watched as I turned and walked out the door. The second I stepped into the hallway, the weight on my chest lifted. Jessica had spent months trying to tear me down, trying to make me weak, but she hadn't won. I was still standing. And now? Now, I was ready to watch her fall. The moment I walked out of that interrogation room, I knew there was no going back. Jessica's betrayal was no longer a suspicion or a nightmare that haunted me in the quiet hours of the night. It was real. And now, she was going to pay for it. Detective Morrison, the lead investigator, met me just outside the room. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man with tired eyes, the kind of cop who had seen far too much of the worst parts of humanity. "Well," he said, exhaling as he flipped through a small notepad. "That was interesting." I crossed my arms. "You heard everything?" He nodded. "Every damn word." Jessica's confession, what she said, what she didn't say, was enough to confirm what I already knew. This wasn't just some misunderstanding or a desperate woman making a mistake. It was intentional. Morrison shut his notepad and gave me a long, assessing look. "We're moving forward with formal charges. But we need more than just her words to ensure this sticks in court." I squared my shoulders. "What do you need?" He motioned for me to follow him down the hall. "We've already gotten a warrant for a search of your home," Morrison explained as we walked. "If she's been poisoning you for months, she had to keep whatever she was using somewhere. The toxicology report from your sister-in-law already confirmed foreign substances in her system, ones that don't just end up in coffee." I clenched my jaw. "So, if we find the source, then we have a rock-solid case," Morrison confirmed. We reached the main hospital entrance, where two uniformed officers stood beside their patrol car, waiting. My heart pounded against my ribs as the reality of the moment settled in. Jessica's life, the one she had so carefully built, so desperately protected, was about to come crumbling down. And for the first time, I didn't care. When we arrived at the house, it was surreal walking into what had once been my home. The officers moved through the rooms with practiced efficiency, opening cabinets, drawers, even checking behind the fridge. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom, watching as one of the officers went through Jessica's nightstand. "You lived with her every day," Morrison said beside me. "Did she ever seem nervous? Like she was hiding something?" I let out a slow breath. "She was careful. Very careful. She never left anything obvious out in the open. But I knew Jessica, and I knew she wasn't invincible." We moved to the kitchen next. One officer was already digging through the spice cabinet, another checking the pantry. The detective in charge of collecting evidence turned to Morrison. "We've got something." I followed them to the lower cabinet near the sink. The officer pulled out a small black box, setting it carefully on the counter. It looked unremarkable at first, just an ordinary storage container. But when they opened it, the air in the room shifted. Inside were bottles. Small, carefully labeled vials of substances I didn't recognize. Some with their original pharmaceutical labels, others without. Morrison picked one up, his expression darkening. "This," he said, handing it to the evidence tech, "isn't something you buy at a grocery store." I stared at the collection, my stomach churning. All this time, Jessica had been keeping stock of whatever she had been using on me, like I was some experiment. One of the officers handed me a piece of folded paper. "You might want to see this." I unfolded it, my hands tightening around the edges. It was a list. Dates, dosages, effects. She had documented everything. Every single time I had fallen ill. Every headache. Every emergency room visit. Every unexplained sickness. Jessica had written it all down, like she was conducting some kind of sick, twisted study. Morrison let out a low whistle. "Well, this is damning." I swallowed hard, feeling my pulse roar in my ears. "You're telling me?" The realization hit me like a truck. She never planned on stopping. If I hadn't switched that cup with Caroline's, if I hadn't started questioning things, would I have survived the next dose? Would she have gone all the way? The thought sent ice through my veins. Morrison motioned to the officers. "Bag all of it. We're done here." Back at the station, I watched from a distance as Jessica was led from her holding cell to a different interrogation room. She didn't fight, didn't try to run, but when she caught sight of me through the window, she hesitated. For just a moment, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Regret? Or just fear of what happens next? Detective Morrison gestured for me to step inside the observation room. From here, I could see and hear everything, but Jessica couldn't see me anymore. He sat across from her, setting the black box on the table with a thud. Jessica's entire body tensed. Morrison leaned forward. "You recognize this, don't you?" She didn't answer. "You kept records," he continued, tapping the sheet of paper I had read earlier. You documented every time you poisoned your husband. The amounts, the effects, even how much stronger you needed to make it each time. Jessica's jaw tightened. Morrison tilted his head. Tell me, Jessica, was there ever going to be a point where you stopped? Or was Nathan just a problem you were planning to permanently remove? She inhaled sharply, but again, she didn't deny it. Morrison sat back, shaking his head. Here's the deal. You're facing multiple charges, and trust me, none of them are going away. The evidence speaks for itself. He gestured to the vials. These chemicals don't just end up in someone's coffee by accident. Jessica's hands trembled slightly in her cuffs. I didn't. I wasn't trying to. Save it, Morrison cut in. The only thing left for you to decide is whether you want to fight this in court or cooperate. Jessica's face twisted, her breath uneven. Morrison didn't press her. He didn't need to. Because we both knew the truth now. There was no coming back from this. Jessica had destroyed her life with her own hands. And as much as part of me wanted to feel sorry for her, I just couldn't. This was justice. The courtroom was silent as the judge entered, his expression unreadable. I sat in the front row, my hands clenched together, watching as Jessica was led inside. She looked different from the woman I had married. Smaller, weaker, as if the weight of her crimes had finally settled on her shoulders. She didn't look at me. Not once. The trial had been long, grueling, and painfully public. The media had gotten hold of the story early on. A successful businessman poisoned by his own wife in a slow, methodical attempt to destroy his career. The details were too sensational for them to ignore. Jessica's defense team had tried everything. They painted her as a woman driven to desperation, overshadowed by her husband's success, pressured by a competitive industry. They argued that she hadn't meant to cause permanent harm, only to level the playing field. But the evidence was overwhelming. The prosecution had laid it all out, piece by piece. 1. The toxicology reports. The substances found in Caroline's system were traced directly to the vials recovered from our home. The slow-acting poison had been used in varying doses, just enough to cause sickness without immediate suspicion. 2. The recordings, my secret recordings from the brunch, where Jessica confessed to sabotaging me, were played for the jury. The sound of her voice, laced with frustration and entitlement, sealed her fate. 3. The documented pattern, the handwritten notes from our kitchen cabinet, Jessica's detailed log of my symptoms, had been particularly damning. The prosecutors called it a systematic experiment in cruelty. 4. The witness testimonies. Caroline had taken the stand, her voice shaking as she recounted how Jessica had dismissed her concerns over the years. My colleagues from work testified about my unexplained illnesses, my declining health, and how Jessica had subtly planted doubts about my reliability. When the lead prosecutor delivered his closing statement, I knew it was over. This was not an accident, he said firmly, pacing the courtroom floor. This was premeditation. Jessica Bennett did not act out of desperation. She acted out of calculation. She saw an obstacle in her husband, and instead of working harder, she tried to eliminate him. Jessica sat stone-faced as the jury was dismissed to deliberate. It didn't take them long. 2 hours later, they returned. The judge asked the foreperson to read the verdict. My heart pounded in my chest. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty on all counts. Jessica inhaled sharply, her mask finally cracking. I let out a slow breath, closing my eyes for just a moment. It's over. The judge wasted no time. Given the overwhelming evidence, Jessica was sentenced to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole. The words echoed in the courtroom, a final, undeniable truth. I didn't celebrate. I didn't cheer. Because in the end, no one won. Jessica had lost her freedom, her career, and everything she had once valued. And me? I had lost a woman I had once loved. After the sentencing, I stepped outside the courthouse, the crisp air biting against my skin. Reporters were already swarming, their cameras flashing as they shouted questions. How do you feel now that justice has been served? What would you say to Jessica if you had the chance? I ignored them, because the truth was, I didn't feel anything. Not relief, not anger, not even satisfaction. Just exhaustion. A soft voice pulled me from my thoughts. Nathan. I turned. Caroline stood a few feet away, her face pale but steady. She was still recovering, but she looked stronger than she had that day at the hospital. You okay? I asked. She let out a small, bitter laugh. Am I okay? My sister just got sentenced to prison for trying to poison my brother-in-law. So no, not really. I sighed. Yeah, same here. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then Caroline shook her head. I don't understand her, she murmured. She had everything. A good career. A husband who loved her. A life she built from nothing. And she threw it away. I didn't respond right away, because I didn't understand it either. I think, I said finally, Jessica convinced herself that nothing she had was ever enough. Caroline exhaled, rubbing her arms against the cold. You think she regrets it? I thought back to the courtroom, to the way Jessica had stared blankly at the table as the judge read her sentence. I don't know, I admitted, but it doesn't really matter anymore. Caroline nodded. Because in the end, Jessica's regrets wouldn't change anything. She had made her choices, and now, she had to live with them. Months passed. Life slowly moved forward. Jessica's trial had been a spectacle, but soon, people found new stories to obsess over. The headlines faded. The whispers at work quieted. And I healed. It wasn't instant. It wasn't easy. But day by day, I rebuilt. The Henderson account, the very contract Jessica had tried to sabotage, ended up solidifying my career. After hearing about the trial, the firm doubled down on their trust in me, offering more opportunities, more clients, more success than I had ever imagined. Jessica had tried to destroy me, and in the end, all she had done was make me stronger. 1 year later, I stood at the podium of a corporate event, staring out at the sea of faces in front of me. I had been invited as a keynote speaker, a recognition of my resilience, my work ethic, my success. As I stepped up to the microphone, I let the moment settle. Then, I spoke. Success isn't just about talent or hard work, I began. It's about integrity. It's about the relationships we build, the trust we earn. I paused, my mind flickering back to everything I had been through. Sometimes, I continued, the biggest obstacles in our lives come from the people closest to us. And when that happens, we have two choices. We can let it break us, or we can let it fuel us. A quiet murmur ran through the crowd. I smiled faintly. I chose to rise, I finished. And I'm standing here today because of it. The room erupted in applause. And as I stepped away from the podium, shaking hands with my colleagues, I realized something. I had survived. Jessica had tried to take everything from me. But in the end, I was the one who won. 1 year. It had been exactly 1 year since the trial ended. 1 year since Jessica had been sentenced to 25 years in prison. 1 year since I had walked out of that courthouse, carrying the weight of betrayal, relief, and exhaustion all at once. And yet, despite everything, I was still here. Stronger. Thriving. I took a slow sip of my coffee, the first cup I had truly enjoyed in a long time, before setting it down on the polished mahogany desk in front of me. My office was quiet, save for the distant hum of traffic outside the high-rise window. The skyline stretched before me, a reminder of how much had changed in just 12 months. A year ago, I had sat in this very chair, my mind clouded with doubt, betrayal eating away at me like a slow poison. My career had been in shambles, my personal life even worse. I had spent months questioning everything, how I could have been so blind, how I had let someone I loved so deeply turn against me. But that was then. And now? Now, I was at the top of my game. After the trial, the Henderson account, the very project Jessica had tried to sabotage, became one of the most successful campaigns our firm had ever handled. Clients took notice. My reputation grew. And as Jessica faded into irrelevance, I rose higher than ever before. Nathan? I glanced up from my desk as my assistant, Lauren, stepped into the office. You have a call online too. It's from Nashville State Correctional. I went still. I didn't need to ask who it was. Jessica. I hadn't spoken to her since the trial, hadn't written, hadn't visited, hadn't acknowledged her existence. And yet, here she was, reaching out from the prison cell she had so carefully crafted for herself. Lauren hesitated. Want me to tell them you're unavailable? I stared at the blinking light on my phone, debating. Then I nodded. Yeah, do that. She gave me a knowing look before disappearing down the hall. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. Jessica had already stolen enough from me. My time, my trust, my peace of mind. I wasn't about to give her another second. That evening, I met Caroline for dinner. It had become a tradition of sorts, checking in with each other, making sure we were both healing in our own ways. She had struggled after the trial, too. Losing her sister had left a void in her life, even after everything Jessica had done. Guess who called me today? I said as I poured her a glass of wine. She didn't even hesitate. Jessica. I raised an eyebrow. How'd you know? Caroline let out a tired laugh. She called me last week. I frowned. And? She shrugged. Begged for forgiveness. Said she regretted everything. Asked if I could help her get an appeal. I scoffed. An appeal? After everything? Caroline swirled the wine in her glass. Yep. She swears she wasn't in her right mind. That she never meant to hurt you. I studied her carefully. Do you believe her? She hesitated, then sighed. I think she regrets it, but not because she's sorry. I think she regrets getting caught. I nodded. That was exactly what I thought, too. Caroline tilted her head. Are you going to visit her? I let out a short laugh. Not a chance. She didn't argue. Instead, she raised her glass. To moving forward? I lifted mine in return. To moving forward. Months passed. The media stopped talking about Jessica. People stopped whispering about the trial. And I stopped thinking about her. For the first time in years, I could wake up without feeling like I had to look over my shoulder. I could go to work, meet with clients, live my life without fear. One afternoon, as I prepared for yet another high-profile pitch, my phone buzzed with an email notification. I almost ignored it until I saw the subject line. Henderson account, contract renewal. I opened it immediately, scanning the message. They were extending their contract for another 3 years. I sat back in my chair, a slow smile spreading across my face. Jessica had tried to take everything from me. And yet, despite all her efforts, I was still winning. That weekend, I took a trip out to the lake. I hadn't been back since before everything happened, but standing there, watching the water ripple under the afternoon sun, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my saved messages. Then, with a deep breath, I deleted every single one of Jessica's texts. The ones where she had played the doting wife. The ones where she had pretended to care. The ones where she had sent passive-aggressive remarks about my career, my success, my future. One by one, I erased them. And with each deleted message, I felt lighter. Freer. Jessica's name no longer held weight over me. Her choices, her betrayal, her downfall. It was hers to carry now, not mine. And as I walked back to my car, taking one last look at the lake, I smiled. Not because I had won, not because she had lost, but because, after everything, I had finally found what she never could. Peace. I stood there in the back row of that fancy auditorium, my legs aching from a double shift at the warehouse and my hands still greasy from fixing a carburetor that morning. The air smelled like perfume and polished wood, nothing like the oil and sweat I'm used to. My eyes burned from lack of sleep. For hours a night for 6 years will do that to a man, but I couldn't stop staring at the stage. Camille was up there, my wife, glowing in her cap and gown, a doctor at last. I dreamed of this moment as much as she had. Every paycheck I'd handed over, every late-night Uber run, every time I said no to a beer with the guys so I could pay her tuition, it was all for this. My chest swelled with pride, and I thought, we did it. Babe. We really did it. The crowd clapped as she crossed the stage, her smile wide and bright, her dark hair shining under the lights. I adjusted my tie, borrowed from a buddy because I never owned one, and waited for her to look my way. She didn't. She floated down the steps, and I started pushing through the crowd, my boots heavy on the carpeted floor. I wanted to hug her, to tell her how proud I was, how every sacrifice was worth it. But then she stopped near a group of her med school friends, all dressed in suits and dresses that cost more than my truck. A man stepped up beside her, tall, sharp-looking, with a suit that fit like it was made for him. His hair was slicked back, and he had this easy confidence I could never pull off. Camille grabbed his arm, her face lighting up even more, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "This is my husband, Julian. He's the reason I'm here today." The words hit me like a wrench to the gut. Husband? Julian? I froze, my breath stuck somewhere between my lungs and my throat. The crowd clapped again, polite and happy, and I just stood there, a ghost in my own life. My hands clenched into fists, the calluses rubbing against each other, reminding me of every hour I'd worked for her. 6 years of my life, poured into her dream, and she didn't even glance my way. I watched her laugh, her head tilting back like she used to do with me, and Julian smiled down at her like he'd been there all along. My ears rang, drowning out the chatter around me. I wanted to scream, to march up there and demand answers, but my feet wouldn't move. All I could do was stare as the woman I loved, the woman I'd built this moment for, erased me without a second thought. I don't know how long I stood there, lost in the blur of clapping hands and flashing cameras. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Maybe I'd heard her wrong. Maybe it was a joke, some weird med school prank I didn't get. But then she leaned into Julian, her hand resting on his chest, and I saw the way her friends nodded, like they'd known him forever. My stomach twisted, and I felt the weight of every dollar I'd spent. Every night I'd come home to an empty bed because she was studying. I'd paid for that gown she was wearing, the textbooks she'd highlighted, the rent on her downtown condo while I slept in a one-room dump with a leaky roof. And now she was calling this guy her husband? My vision blurred, not from tears, I wouldn't let that happen, but from pure, raw shock. People moved around me, brushing past like I was invisible, and maybe I was. To them, I was just some guy in a borrowed tie, not the man who'd carried Camille through 6 years of hell. My heart pounded, loud and heavy, and I wondered if she'd ever planned to tell me. Did she think I'd just fade away, happy to be her stepping stone? I replayed her words in my head. He's the reason I'm here today, and they cut deeper each time. I was the reason she was there. Me. Mason Reed. Not Julian, whoever he was. I'd given up everything, my time, my money, my dreams, so she could have this. And now she was standing there, rewriting our story, handing my victory to someone else. I took a step back, my boots scuffing the floor, and the sound snapped me out of my daze. I couldn't stay there, surrounded by her new life, her new lie. My chest ached, but I straightened up, forcing air into my lungs. I wasn't going to fall apart, not here, not in front of her and her fancy crowd. I turned toward the exit, my mind spinning with questions I didn't have answers to. How long had this been going on? When did I stop being her husband? And why did she think she could just throw me away like I was nothing? As I pushed through the double doors into the cool night air, I felt the first crack in my world, but I didn't know then how deep it would go. All I knew was that Camille had taken everything I'd given her and handed it to someone else, and I wasn't sure what that left me with. I stood in that quiet hallway outside the auditorium, the muffled sound of laughter and clinking glasses seeping through the walls like a taunt. My hands were shoved deep in my pockets, the borrowed tie hanging loose around my neck now, like it didn't belong on me anymore. The air out here was cooler, but it didn't calm the heat rising in my chest. I kept replaying Camille's voice in my head. This is my husband, Julian, and every time it hit me, it felt like a punch I couldn't dodge. I wanted to believe I'd misheard her, that it was some kind of mistake, a slip of the tongue. Maybe she'd had too much champagne, or maybe I was just too tired to think straight after pulling a double shift. But deep down, I knew better. I'd seen the way she looked at him, the way her hand rested on his arm like it was the most natural thing in the world. That wasn't a mistake. That was a choice. I leaned against the wall, the cold plaster pressing into my back, and stared at the polished floor. My boots looked out of place here, scuffed and worn next to the shiny tiles. I tried to piece it together. When did this happen? How long had she been calling this Julian guy her husband? My mind raced back through the last 6 years, searching for clues I'd missed. I'd been so busy working fixing cars, loading boxes, driving strangers around town that I hadn't noticed her slipping away. Or maybe I had, and I just told myself it was stress, med school pressure, nothing personal. I'd been a fool, hadn't I? A fool who thought love was enough to keep us together, even when she started spending more nights at the library than at home, even when her calls got shorter and her smiles got rare. The auditorium doors swung open, and a burst of noise spilled out, cheers, chatter, the kind of happiness I wasn't part of. I straightened up, wiping my palms on my pants, and that's when I saw Sadie, Camille's little sister, rushing toward me. Her eyes were wide, her face pale like she'd just seen a ghost. "Mason," she said, her voice shaky. What are you doing out here? Did you hear what she said? I nodded, slow and heavy, not trusting myself to speak yet. Sadie's mouth opened, then closed, like she didn't know what to say either. She glanced back toward the crowd, where Camille was still laughing with her friends, Julian at her side. I don't understand, Sadie whispered, stepping closer. She told me you were coming tonight. She said you'd be here for her. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. Guess she forgot to mention the part where I'm not her husband anymore, I said, my voice rougher than I meant it to be. Sadie's eyes darted between me and the auditorium, and I could see her trying to make sense of it. Same as me. She'd always been a good kid, 22 now, but still the same sweet girl who'd crashed on our couch when she needed a break from their mom. She'd seen me pay the bills, cook the dinners, keep the lights on while Camille studied. She knew the truth. I'll talk to her, Sadie said, turning like she was about to march back in there. I grabbed her arm, gentle but firm. Don't, I said. Let her have her moment. I just need to know what's real. Before Sadie could argue, I heard Camille's voice again, louder this time, drifting out as the doors opened for someone else. Mason? Oh, he's just a friend who helped me out when times were tough, she said, casual as if she were talking about borrowing a pen. My stomach dropped, and Sadie's head whipped around, her jaw tight. A friend, she muttered, looking at me like she couldn't believe it either. I forced a shrug, even though it felt like my chest was caving in. Guess that's what I am now, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But inside, I was breaking. 6 years of my life, reduced to just a friend. Every late night, every skip meal, every time I told her, you've got this, babe, it was all nothing to her now. I peeked through the crack in the door, watching her. She was surrounded by her med school crew, smart, polished people who probably never had grease under their nails. Julian stood there, smirking like he owned the room, and next to him was a woman in a white coat, older, with sharp eyes, probably Dr. Simone Arnett, Camille's big shot mentor. They were all nodding, smiling, eating up her story. And then there was me, out here in the hallway, invisible. Sadie grabbed my hand, squeezing it tight. She's wrong, Mason. You're not just a friend. You're everything she's not saying. Her voice cracked, and I could tell she was mad at Camille, mad at the lie. I wanted to believe her, but all I could feel was the weight of being erased. I let go of Sadie's hand and stepped back, my head spinning. I need air, I said, turning toward the exit. She called after me, but I kept walking, my boots echoing in the empty hall. Outside, the night was crisp, the stars hidden by city lights. I leaned against the building, sucking in deep breaths, trying to figure out what I was supposed to do next. Part of me wanted to storm back in there, grab the mic, and tell everyone the truth, how I'd pawned my granddad's watch for her first semester, how I'd worked through fevers and exhaustion just to keep her in school. But what would that get me? A room full of pity? I didn't want their pity. I wanted my wife back. I wanted the life we'd planned, the one where we'd celebrate this together, not with me standing out here like some stranger. I rubbed my face, my hands rough against my skin, and thought about Julian. Who was he? Some rich guy she'd met at school? A doctor? A lawyer? He didn't look like he'd ever lifted anything heavier than a briefcase. And yet, she'd picked him to stand beside her, to take my place. My mind flashed to the times she'd come home late, saying she'd been studying with friends. Had he been one of them? Had she been building this other life right under my nose? I kicked the wall, the thud loud in the quiet, and cursed under my breath. I'd trusted her. I'd loved her. And now I was nothing to her, just a shadow she'd stepped over on her way to something better. Sadie's words stuck with me, though. You're everything she's not saying. Maybe she was right. Maybe Camille could rewrite our story for her fancy friends, but she couldn't erase the truth. I'd been there. Every step, every dollar, every tear. I wasn't just a friend. I was the man who'd held her up when she couldn't stand on her own. And as I stood there, the cold sinking into my bones, I realized something. I didn't need her to say it. I knew who I was. The question was, what was I going to do about it? I didn't have an answer yet, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let her lie be the end of me. Not tonight. Not ever. I sat in my truck in the parking garage, the engine off, the keys dangling in my hand, just staring at the concrete wall ahead. The graduation ceremony was still buzzing in my head, Camille's voice, that guy Julian, the way she'd smiled like I didn't exist. My chest felt tight, like someone had parked a car on it, and my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I'd walked out of that hallway with Sadie's words ringing in my ears, but now, alone in the dark, all I could hear was Camille saying, Mason, he's just a friend. Just a friend. 6 years of my life, And that's what I got. I wanted to hit something, to scream, to make sense of it, but instead, I just sat there, the silence pressing in around me like a weight I couldn't shake. The garage was dim, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead, casting shadows that danced across the dashboard. I'd parked here hours ago, full of pride, thinking I'd be driving home with my wife, the doctor, laughing about how we'd made it through. Now, I didn't even know where home was anymore. My phone buzzed in my pocket, probably Sadie checking on me, but I didn't look. I couldn't face her pity right now, or anyone's. I needed answers, and the only person who could give them to me was Camille. I'd seen her head toward the garage with Julian and her friends, all of them chattering like they were on top of the world. I'd waited, not sure why, until the crowd thinned out. Maybe I wanted her to see me, to remember I was still here. Maybe I just wanted to know how she could do this. I spotted her then, walking across the lot, her heels clicking on the pavement. Julian was with her, his arm around her waist, and they were heading for a sleek black car that looked like it cost more than I'd made in a year. My stomach twisted, but I pushed the door open and stepped out, my boots loud against the ground. "Camille," I called, my voice rough, echoing off the concrete. She stopped, her head snapping toward me, and for a second, I saw something flicker in her eyes, shock, maybe guilt. Julian turned too, his eyebrows lifting like he was surprised I could talk. "Mason," she said, her tone sharp, like I'd interrupted something important. "What are you doing here?" I took a step closer, my hands clenched at my sides. "What am I doing here? I came to see my wife graduate. You know, the one I've been supporting for 6 years." My voice was louder than I meant it to be, but I didn't care. She flinched, glancing at Julian, then back at me. "Mason, this isn't the time," she said, smoothing her hair like she could brush me off that easy. "I've got people waiting. We can talk later." Later? After she'd just called some other guy her husband in front of everyone? I laughed, short and bitter, and it sounded wrong in the empty garage. "No, Camille. We're talking now. Who the hell is this guy?" I jerked my head toward Julian, who straightened up, his jaw tight like he was ready to step in. Camille's face hardened, and she crossed her arms. "This is Julian, my husband. I thought you'd figured that out by now." Her words hit me like a slap, cold and final, and I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. But she just stood there, her chin up, like she was daring me to argue. "Your husband?" I said, my voice cracking. "Since when? Last I checked, I was the one you married. I was the one paying for all this." I waved a hand toward her gown, her fancy life. 6 years, Camille. I worked 3 jobs so you could stand on that stage tonight. And now you're telling me I'm nothing?" She sighed, loud and dramatic, like I was the one being unreasonable. "Mason, don't make this a scene. You were never part of this world. I couldn't have them thinking I came from nothing. Julian, he gets it. He's in this with me." Her words cut deeper than I thought they could, each one slicing through the years I'd spent believing in us. "Nothing?" I repeated, stepping closer, my voice low and shaking. "I gave up everything for you. My granddad's watch, my weekends, my health gone, so you could have this. And you're standing there telling me I'm nothing?" Julian moved then, putting a hand on her shoulder like he was protecting her from me. "Look, man," he said, his voice smooth and smug, "she's made her choice. You need to let it go." I turned on him, my fist itching to wipe that smirk off his face. "You don't get to talk to me," I snapped. "You don't know what I've been through for her." He raised his hands, backing off a step, but his eyes said he wasn't scared, just annoyed, like I was a bug he wanted to flick away. Camille stepped between us, her face cold now. "Mason, stop. You've done a lot, okay? I'm grateful. You supported me when I needed it. But Julian's my future. He's where I'm going. You wouldn't understand the pressure I'm under." "Pressure?" I almost laughed again, but it caught in my throat. "Pressure," I said, my voice rising. "You think I don't know pressure? Try working 16 hours a day, coming home to a cold bed, eating ramen so you could have steak with your study group. I lived pressure so you wouldn't have to. And now you're throwing it back in my face." She didn't answer, just looked away, her lips pressed tight. Julian shifted, checking his watch like I was wasting his time. That's when it hit me, she wasn't even sorry. She'd planned this, maybe not from the start, but somewhere along the way. She'd decided I wasn't good enough, and she'd found someone who fit her new life better. I took a deep breath, forcing my hands to unclench. "You're right," I said, quieter now, the fight draining out of me. "I don't understand. I don't get how you can look at me and say that after everything." She met my eyes then, and for a second, I thought I saw something, regret. Maybe, but it was gone fast. I'm sorry it's like this, she said, her voice flat. But it's done. Go home, Mason. Go home. Like it was that simple. Like I could just walk away and forget the life I'd built for her. I stared at her, the woman I'd loved, the woman I'd carried, and I didn't recognize her anymore. Yeah, I said finally, turning back to my truck. I'll go. I didn't look back as I climbed in, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the frame. The engine roared to life, and I peeled out of the garage, the tires screeching on the concrete. My hands gripped the wheel so tight my knuckles turned white, and my eyes burned, but I didn't cry. I wouldn't give her that. She'd taken enough from me already. As I hit the open road, the city lights blurring past, I felt something shift inside me. She thought this was the end, that I'd just fade away. But she was wrong. My silence wasn't surrender. It was the start of something else, something she'd never see coming. I didn't know what yet, but I'd figure it out. I always did. I drove home that night with the windows down, the cold air whipping through the truck, trying to clear the fog in my head. Camille's words kept looping in my mind. You were never part of this world, and every time they hit, I felt the sting all over again. My hands gripped the steering wheel, the rough skin of my palms catching on the worn leather, and I couldn't stop thinking about the past 6 years. The truth of it, not her shiny new version. I pulled into the lot of my one-bedroom apartment, the place I'd kept so she could have her fancy condo near campus, and cut the engine. The silence settled in, heavy and thick, and I just sat there, staring at the cracked dashboard, letting the memories flood back. I needed to remember it all, every second I'd given her, because if I didn't, she'd win. She'd rewrite me out of her story, and I'd be left with nothing. It started 6 years ago, when Camille came home from her waitressing job with a wild look in her eyes. Mason, she'd said, dropping her apron on the couch, I want to be a doctor. I know it's crazy, but I can do it. I'd laughed at first, thinking she was joking, but she wasn't. She had this fire in her, this dream she'd buried under years of late shifts and bad tips. I saw how much it meant to her, and I loved her for it. So I said, okay, babe, let's make it happen. I didn't know then what it had cost me, but I'd have said yes anyway. That's what you do when you love someone. You jump in, even if the water's deep. We sat up all night, figuring it out. She'd need to quit her job, go back to school, take the hard classes first. And money, God, the money. Tuition, books, rent near the university. I told her I'd handle it. I'd make it work. The first semester was the toughest. I was still just a mechanic then, pulling decent hours, but it wasn't enough. I remember the day I took my granddad's watch to the pawn shop, a beat-up old thing he'd worn every day of his life. It wasn't worth much, maybe a couple $100, but it was all I had left of him. The guy behind the counter slid the cash over, and I felt a lump in my throat as I walked out. I didn't tell Camille where the money came from, just handed her the check for her first tuition payment and said, "You're on your way, babe." She hugged me so tight that night, her tears soaking my shirt, and I thought, this is it. This is us. I didn't care about the watch. I cared about her smile. After that, it was all a blur of work. I picked up the warehouse gig, loading boxes until my back screamed, then started driving Uber on weekends when the bills piled up. I'd come home at dawn sometimes, my eyes half open, and find her asleep on the couch with a textbook across her chest. I'd carry her to bed, her head heavy against my shoulder, and I'd feel this quiet pride. She was doing it, acing her classes, impressing her professors, and I was the one holding it all together. I missed things, though. My buddy's wedding, because I couldn't skip a shift. My mom's funeral, because the flight was too expensive, and Camille had a big exam that week. I told myself it was fine, that family would understand, but it ate at me. I'd sit in the dark sometimes, eating cold leftovers, wondering when I'd get a break. But then Camille would come home, exhausted but happy, and tell me about some test she'd crushed, and I'd think, worth it. The distance started creeping in slow, like rust on a car you don't notice until it's too late. She'd stay late at school, saying she was studying with friends. I'd call, and she'd sound distracted, rushed. "I'm fine, Mason, just busy," she'd say, and I'd let it go. Friends warned me, guys at the shop, my sister, even Sadie once. "She's changing, man," they'd say. "You sure she's still in this?" I'd brush them off. "She's stressed," I'd tell them. "Med school's hard. She needs me to keep it steady." I believed it because I had to. Love made me blind, I guess. I'd see her come home in new clothes, nice stuff I didn't buy, and she'd say it was a gift from a classmate. I'd nod, too tired to push, and keep working. Always working. One night stands out, maybe 2 years in. I'd been sick, fever, chills, the works, but I couldn't miss a shift. Rent was due, and her textbooks weren't cheap. I came home shaking, barely able to stand, and she was there, studying at the table. She looked up, worried, and said, "Mason, you're burning up. Go to bed." I shook my head, said I'd be fine, but she got up, made me soup, sat with me while I ate. She held my hand, her fingers soft against my rough skin, and said, "I couldn't do this without you." I fell asleep with her next to me, thinking we were solid. But looking back, that was one of the last times I felt close to her. After that, she started pulling away, longer nights out, shorter talks, excuses piling up. I told myself it was the pressure, that she'd come back to me when it was over. I was wrong. I snapped out of it, back in my truck, the memories fading into the dark. My hands were cold now, the keys digging into my palm. I'd given her everything, my time, my money, my heart, and she'd taken it all, then handed it to someone else. I thought about that condo I'd paid for, the one I'd never lived in because it was closer to campus. I'd stayed in this dump, with its thin walls and leaky roof, so she could have something better. I'd skipped meals, worked through pain, let my own life shrink down to nothing, all for her. And now she was standing there with Julian, saying I didn't fit her world. Like I was some dirty secret she'd outgrown. I climbed out of the truck, slamming the door hard enough to make the frame shake, and trudged up the stairs to my apartment. The place smelled like motor oil and stale coffee, the way it always did. I dropped onto the couch, staring at the ceiling, and felt the anger settle in deep. Not just at her, but at myself. I'd let this happen. I'd ignored the signs, the warnings, because I loved her too much to see the truth. But not anymore. I sat up, my jaw tight, and looked around at the life I'd let slip away. The pawned watch, the missed moments, the years I'd poured into her, they were gone. But I wasn't. I was still here, still breathing, still me. She could have her new world, her new husband. I'd find my own way back. Not for her, not for anyone else, just for me. And that was enough for now. I stood outside that swanky downtown venue, my hands stuffed in the pockets of a suit I'd never worn before, watching the lights spill out onto the street. It was Camille and Julian's engagement party. Yeah, they moved fast, and I wasn't supposed to be here. The invitation hadn't come my way, not that I expected it to. I'd heard about it from Sadie, who'd called me up, her voice tight with anger, saying, "She's acting like you never existed, Mason. It's not right." I didn't plan to show up, not at first. I'd spent the last few days after the graduation trying to keep my head down, fixing cars, loading boxes, driving strangers around, anything to keep my mind off her. But something in me wouldn't let it go. Not revenge, not exactly. I just needed them to know I wasn't invisible. So there I was, in a suit I'd bought years ago for a wedding we never had, holding an envelope that felt heavier than it should have. The place was packed, fancy cars lined up, people in dresses and ties laughing like money grew on trees. I could hear music drifting out, some soft jazz thing that didn't fit my world. My boots felt loud on the pavement as I walked up, the doorman eyeing me like I was lost. "Name?" he asked, flipping through a clipboard. "Mason Reed," I said, keeping my voice steady. He frowned, scanning the list, then shook his head. "You're not on here." I nodded, like I'd expected that, and said, "I won't be long. Just dropping something off." He hesitated, then shrugged and waved me in. I guess I didn't look like trouble. Not yet, anyway. Inside, it was all gold and glass, chandeliers sparkling overhead, waiters weaving through with trays of tiny food I couldn't name. I spotted Camille right away, glowing in a white dress that hugged her like it was made for her. Julian was next to her, his arm around her waist, talking to some older couple who looked like they owned half the city. His parents, probably. Her med school friends were there too, clinking glasses, and a couple of young guys with cameras, maybe media interns, snapping pictures. I stood by the wall for a minute, taking it in, feeling the weight of that envelope in my hand. It wasn't anger driving me now. It was something quieter, something I couldn't name. I just knew I had to do this. I started across the room, my steps slow but sure, and I saw Camille's head turn. Her eyes locked on mine, and her smile faltered, just for a second. She whispered something to Julian, who glanced my way, his face tightening. I didn't stop. People parted around me, their chatter fading as they noticed something was off. I reached the little stage where a mic stood, probably for speeches later, and I stepped up, tapping it once. The sound cut through the room, sharp and loud, and every head turned. Camille's face went pale, and Julian took a step forward, like he might stop me. Too late. I pulled the envelope out and held it up, my voice calm but firm. Evening, everyone. I'm Mason Reed. You don't know me, but I've got a story to tell. I opened the envelope and slid out the papers, bank statements, tuition receipts, a spreadsheet I'd spent hours putting together. 6 years ago, I said, looking out at the crowd, my wife, Camille, decided she wanted to be a doctor. I told her I'd make it happen. And I did. I held up the first sheet. This is every dollar I paid. $220,000 and change. Textbooks, rent, tuition. I worked 3 jobs: mechanic, warehouse loader, Uber driver. I pawned my granddad's watch, skipped meals, missed my mom's funeral, all so she could stand here tonight. The room was dead quiet now, just the hum of the mic and the rustle of paper. I glanced at Camille. She was frozen, her hands clenched, and kept going. I didn't do it for thanks. I did it because I loved her. But a few days ago, at her graduation, she introduced this guy. I nodded at Julian, as her husband. Said I was just a friend who helped out. So I figured you all deserve the truth. I flipped through the pages, letting them see the numbers, the dates, the proof. Every cent I made, I gave her. I lived in a one-room dump, so she could have a condo downtown. I worked through fevers, 16-hour days, because I believed in her dream. And now she's here, celebrating with you, and I'm not even a name on the list. I paused, letting it sink in, then looked straight at Camille. I may not be the man beside her today, but I'm the reason she ever made it here. That's all I came to say. I set the papers down on the podium, stepped off the stage, and started for the door. The silence broke, then gasps, whispers, a few claps I didn't expect. I didn't look back. I heard her voice as I reached the exit. Mason, wait. But I kept walking. Outside, the air hit me cold and sharp, and I sucked it in deep, my heart pounding. I'd done it. Not to hurt her, not to ruin her night, just to stand up for myself. My truck was parked a block away, and I was halfway there when Sadie caught up, her heels clacking on the sidewalk. Mason, that was insane, she said, breathless, her eyes wide. You okay? I nodded, not trusting my voice yet. They're freaking out in there, she went on. Camille's panicking, Julian's pissed. You shook them up. I shrugged, kicking a pebble across the street. Didn't do it for them, I said. Did it for me. She grabbed my arm, stopping me. You didn't have to, you know. You could have let her have her lie. I looked at her, the streetlights catching her worried face, and shook my head. No, I couldn't. She doesn't get to erase me, Sadie. Not after everything. She nodded, slow, like she got it, and let go. What now? She asked. I didn't have an answer, not really. Go home, I guess, I said, turning toward my truck. Figure it out tomorrow. She watched me go, and I could feel her eyes on my back as I climbed in and started the engine. Driving away, the city lights blurred past, and I felt lighter than I had in days. Not happy, not yet, just unburdened. I'd laid it all out, every sacrifice, every dollar, and they couldn't unhear it. Camille's world might have cracked a little tonight, but mine didn't. I'd stood there, in my cheap suit and scuffed boots, and told the truth. Not her truth, not Julian's, mine. And as the road stretched out ahead, dark and quiet, I realized something. I didn't need their applause or her apology. I'd taken back what she tried to steal, my story, my worth. It wasn't much, not compared to their fancy party, but it was mine. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough. I woke up the next morning with my head pounding, the kind of ache that comes from too little sleep and too much thinking. My apartment was quiet, the early light sneaking through the blinds, hitting the empty coffee mug on the table. I'd barely slept after the engagement party, just sat on the couch, staring at nothing, replaying what I'd done. Walking into that room, taking the mic, spilling 6 years of my life for strangers to hear, it felt like a dream, something I'd watched someone else do. But it was real. The envelope was gone, left on that podium, and so was the weight I'd been carrying. I didn't know what would happen next, but I'd lit a match, and now I could feel the heat. I dragged myself to the kitchen, brewed some coffee, and tried to shake the fog. My phone buzzed on the counter, Sadie again, probably checking in. I ignored it for now, needing a minute to breathe. The TV was on low, some morning news show, and I was halfway through my first sip when I heard it. Local man's speech at engagement party goes viral. My stomach dropped, and I turned up the volume, staring at the screen. There I was, grainy footage from someone's phone, standing on that stage with my papers in hand. I worked 3 jobs. I'm the reason she ever made it here. My voice crackled through the speakers. The anchor cut in, saying, Mason Reed's story of sacrifice has sparked a firestorm online, with thousands sharing his words. I sank onto the couch, the mug warm in my hands, watching my life spill out for the world to see. It didn't take long for things to spiral. By noon, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing texts, calls, voicemails from numbers I didn't know. Sadie finally got through, her voice fast and excited. Mason, you're everywhere. People are losing it over this. Camille's freaking out, she called me crying, saying it's a PR nightmare. I rubbed my face, trying to process it. What's she saying? I asked, my throat dry. Sadie hesitated, then said, she's trying to spin it. Told her friends you exaggerated, that it wasn't all you. But no one's buying it. Not after those receipts. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me, and muttered, good. I didn't want her tears or her excuses. I just wanted the truth to stick. The day got weirder from there. I went to the shop, figuring work would keep my head straight, but the guys were already on it. You're famous, Reed. My buddy Tony yelled, waving his phone. Look at this, unsung hero of med school. That's you, man. I shrugged it off, grabbing my tools, but inside, my chest tightened. I'd only meant to stand up for myself, not start some circus. Customers started asking about it too, guys dropping off cars, saying, heard you on the news, Mason. Hell of a story. I kept my answers short, focusing on oil changes and brake pads, but it followed me. By the time I clocked out, my voicemail was full, reporters, mostly, wanting interviews. I deleted them all. I wasn't here for their headlines. That night, Sadie showed up at my place, her eyes bright with something I hadn't seen in her before, pride, maybe. You need to see this, she said, shoving her phone at me. It was a post from one of Camille's med school friends, some guy named Derek. I lived with Camille and Mason for a month, it read. He's not lying. He worked himself to death for her. She's full of it. Sadie grinned. He's not the only one. People are talking, her classmates, old neighbors. They're backing you up. I scrolled through, seeing more tweets, comments, even a video from a girl who'd worked with Camille at the diner. Mason was the real deal, she said. Camille's acting like he didn't exist, but we all saw it. I handed the phone back, my jaw tight. Didn't expect this, I said. Sadie nodded. Neither did she. The next day, it got bigger. I was at the warehouse, hauling boxes, when my boss pulled me aside. You got a call, he said, handing me his phone. It was Dr. Simone Arnett, Camille's mentor, the one I'd seen at the graduation. Her voice was calm, professional. Mr. Reed, I owe you an apology. I didn't know the full story. What Camille did, it's disappointing. I stood there, sweat dripping down my back, not sure what to say. Oh, thanks, I managed. She kept going. I saw the papers you left. It's impressive, what you did. If you ever need legal advice, I know people. No charge. I mumbled something about appreciating it and hung up, my head spinning. Legal advice? I didn't want to fight. I just wanted peace. But peace wasn't coming easy. Camille's world was cracking, and I could feel it even from where I stood. Sadie told me later that Julian's parents were furious, something about their family name getting dragged through the mud. Her med school friends were whispering, pulling back, and her mentors were asking questions. I didn't care about ruining her, but I wasn't sorry either. She'd built her castle on my back, then kicked me out the gate. Now the walls were shaking, and she had no one to blame but herself. I kept waiting for the anger to hit me again, but it didn't. Instead, something strange started happening. People thanked me. It started small. A guy at the gas station clapped me on the shoulder, said, "Heard your story, man. Respect." Then a lady at the grocery store, older, with tired eyes, stopped me. "You remind me of my husband," she said. "He worked like that for me too. Don't let her take that from you." I nodded, awkward, not used to this. But it kept coming, notes left on my truck, messages online, even a kid at the shop who said, "You're like a superhero, mister." I didn't feel like one. I felt tired, raw, like I'd been scraped clean. But those words, they stuck. They built something in me I hadn't expected. By the end of the week, I was sitting on my couch again, the TV off, just listening to the quiet. My phone buzzed, another message, this time from a local reporter asking for a sit-down. I deleted it, same as the others. I didn't need their cameras. What I needed was to figure out what this meant for me, not her. I'd thrown my truth out there, and it had landed hard, but it wasn't about revenge. It was about standing up, being seen. And now people were seeing me, not just as Camille's shadow, but as Mason Reed, the guy who didn't quit. I leaned back, closing my eyes, and let that settle. The world could keep spinning, Camille could keep scrambling. I'd done my part. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe, like the air was mine again, not hers. And that was enough to keep me going. I was tightening a bolt on a rusty old Chevy at the shop when Tony slapped a newspaper on the workbench, grinning like he'd won something. "Check it out, Reed," he said, pointing at the headline, "The man who funded a doctor's dream, then got erased." My name was right there, in big black letters, next to a blurry picture of me from the engagement party, holding up those papers. I wiped my hands on a rag, my stomach doing a flip, and picked it up. Local mechanic Mason Reed's story of sacrifice has captured hearts. It started, and I skimmed the rest, words like inspiration and resilience jumping out at me. I tossed it back on the bench, shaking my head. "Didn't ask for this," I muttered, but Tony just laughed. "Too late, man. You're a hero now." I didn't feel like a hero. I felt exposed, like someone had ripped open my life and put it on display. The shop was busier than usual that day, guys dropping off cars, lingering to shake my hand, saying stuff like, "Heard about you, Mason. Hell of a thing you did." I nodded, kept my answers short, and focused on the work. Wrenches and oil I could handle. This spotlight stuff was new, and I wasn't sure I liked it. But it didn't stop. By lunch, my phone was buzzing again, Sadie this time, saying, "You see the article? It's gone viral, Mason. People love you." I grunted, chewing on a sandwich, and told her, "I just want to fix cars, not be some poster boy." She laughed, but I could hear the pride in her voice. "Too bad. You're stuck with it." The next day, it got real. I was at the community center near my place, dropping off some old tools for their shop class, when a guy in a suit came up to me. "Mason Reed?" he asked, sticking out his hand. "Name's Carl. I run a blue-collar heroes panel, heard of it?" I hadn't, but I shook his hand anyway, my grip firm from years of work. "We talk about guys like you," he said, "people who keep the world running. That speech you gave? We'd love you to speak at our next event." I stared at him, my mouth dry. "I'm not a speaker," I said, shifting my weight. "I just said what I had to." He smiled, like he'd heard that before. "That's why we want you. It's real. Think about it." He handed me a card and walked off, leaving me standing there, the tools heavy in my hands. I thought about it all day, through my shift at the warehouse, through the Uber runs that night. Me, on a stage again, talking to a room full of strangers. It wasn't my thing. I liked quiet, the hum of an engine, the feel of a wrench turning. But something about Carl's words stuck. Guys like me, keeping the world running. I'd spent years running for Camille, and now people saw me for it. Not her, not Julie and me. I called him back that night, my voice steady. "I'll do it," I said, "but I'm not fancy. I'll just tell it like it is." He laughed. "That's perfect." The panel was a week later, at a big hall downtown. I showed up in my best jeans and a clean shirt. No suit this time felt more like me. The room was full, maybe 100 people, all working types, truckers, builders, factory guys. I sat on a folding chair, listening to the others talk, stories of long hours, family struggles, quiet wins. Then it was my turn. I stepped up, the mic heavy in my hand, and looked out at them. "I'm Mason," I said, my voice rough but clear. "I'm a mechanic. Worked 3 jobs for 6 years so my wife could be a doctor. She made it, then told everyone I was just a friend. I showed up at her engagement party with the receipts, $220,000 worth. Not to hurt her, but to say I was there." I paused, the room dead quiet. "I'm not special. Just a guy who did what he had to. If that's a hero, then we all are." They clapped, loud, real claps, not the polite kind from Camille's crowd. A few guys stood, nodding, and I felt my face heat up. I sat down quick, my heart pounding, but it wasn't bad. It was good. After, people came up, shook my hand, told me their own stories. One guy, older, with a limp, said, "I worked doubles for my kid's school. Wife left too. You're not alone, son." I nodded, throat tight, and realized he was right. I wasn't alone. This was bigger than me now. Things kept moving after that. My side hustle, fixing cars out of my garage, picked up. Local guys started calling, saying, "Heard you're the real deal, Mason. Can you look at my truck?" Then a couple of them, small business owners, showed up with an offer. "We'll back you," they said. "Get a real shop going. You've got something people trust." I didn't say yes right away, money's tight, and I'm careful, but I didn't say no either. It was a chance, one I hadn't seen coming. Then, out of nowhere, a doctor from the clinic where Camille used to intern called. Saw your story, he said. I'm building a program, healthcare for working families. Need a consultant who gets it. You in? I laughed, surprised. I'm no doctor, I said. He chuckled. Don't need to be. You know the grind. That's enough. I took the gig part-time. Nothing big, but it paid. I'd sit with him, talk about what guys like me need, cheap checkups, late hours, no fancy nonsense. It felt good, useful. My name was starting to mean something, not because of her, but because of me. People stopped me on the street now, cops, welders, moms with tired eyes, all saying, keep going, Mason. I didn't know what that meant yet, but I nodded, kept moving. The shop idea grew too. Those investors pushed, and I started sketching plans on napkins, late at night when the world was quiet. One evening, I was at the community center again, tinkering with an old engine for the kids' class, when Sadie showed up. You're different, she said, leaning on the workbench. Calmer, stronger. I shrugged, wiping grease off my hands. Maybe, I said, just figuring it out. She smiled soft. They're calling you a blue-collar legend online. Camille hates it. I snorted, shaking my head. Let her hate it. I'm not doing this for her. Sadie nodded, and we stood there, the engine humming between us. I didn't need Camille's stage anymore. I had my own, small, rough, real. The spotlight had turned, and I wasn't running from it. I was standing in it, on my terms, and it felt like mine. For the first time in years, I wasn't just the guy behind someone else. I was Mason Reed, and that was enough. I was elbow deep in a transmission at the shop when my phone buzzed in my pocket, the third time that morning. I wiped my hands on a rag, figuring it was Sadie or maybe another reporter who wouldn't quit, and pulled it out. It was a text from an unknown number. Mason, it's Camille. We need to talk. Please. I stared at it, my thumb hovering over the screen, feeling that old ache creep up my chest. I hadn't heard from her since the engagement party, not directly, just whispers through Sadie about her scrambling to save face. Part of me wanted to delete it, let her stew in whatever mess she'd made, but another part, the part that still remembered her asleep in my arms, wouldn't let me. I typed back, slow and careful. What's there to say? She replied fast. I never thought you'd actually leave. I set the phone down, my jaw tight, and went back to the car. I didn't know her an answer. Not anymore. The next few days, I kept busy, shop work, warehouse shifts, meetings with the doctor about that clinic program. But her message stuck with me, nagging like a loose bolt I couldn't tighten. I didn't want to care, but I did. Then Sadie called, her voice low. Mason, it's getting rough for her. She's up for some big fellowship, and the hospital board's digging into your story. Julian's backing off too. His family's pissed about the publicity. I leaned against my truck, the sun hot on my neck, and sighed. Not my problem, I said, but it didn't feel true. I'd started this, whether I meant to or not. She's texting me, I admitted. Sadie went quiet, then said, what did she say? I told her, and she snorted. She's scared, Mason. She's losing everything she built, and now she's looking back. Don't let her pull you in. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. I won't, I said and hung up. A week later, I got a call from a lawyer, some guy named Harris, voice smooth like he charged by the hour. Mr. Reed, he said, I've been following your situation. You've got a case for spousal repayment, 6 years of support, documented. Could be a big payout. I was in my kitchen, stirring instant coffee, and I stopped cold. A case, I said. Like sewer. He went on, all business, legal terms, percentages, how I'd invested in her career. I cut him off. I didn't do it for money. I did it for her. Harris paused, then said, fair enough. But she's reaping the rewards, and you're not. Think it over. He left his number, and I sat there, the coffee going cold, staring at the wall. Sue her? Drag her through court? Make her pay me back? It didn't sit right. She'd taken enough from me. I didn't want her debt too. Meanwhile, the world kept turning. My shop was picking up. Those investors pushed me to sign a lease on a bigger space, and I was fixing more cars than I could count. The clinic gig was steady too, real work, helping guys like me get checkups without breaking the bank. People still stopped me, said my story kept them going, and I'd nod, awkward but grateful. But Camille's reckoning was happening, and I couldn't ignore it. Sadie told me the hospital board called her in, a review meeting for that fellowship. She had to explain it all, Sadie said over the phone. Your speech, the receipts, how she played it off. They're not happy. I pictured her in some sterile room, facing suits with stern faces, and felt a twinge, not pity, not quite, but something close. She'll figure it out, I said. She's smart. Sadie huffed. Smart doesn't fix this. I heard later, through the grapevine, that Julian was gone. His parents pulled him back, didn't want their name tied to her mess. Sponsors dropped her too. Some big grant she'd been chasing fell through. I didn't cheer, didn't gloat. It wasn't my win to celebrate. I'd said my piece, and the fallout was hers to carry. But that text kept gnawing at me. I never thought you'd actually leave. Like she'd expected me to stay quiet and loyal while she built her new life. I didn't reply, didn't plan to. She'd made her choice, and I'd made mine. Still, it lingered, a loose thread I couldn't cut. One night, I was at the community center, tinkering with an old bike for the kids' class, when Sadie showed up. She's not getting the fellowship, she said, leaning on the workbench. Board's holding off reputation concerns, they called it. I kept my eyes on the chain, adjusting it slow. She'll bounce back, I said, my voice flat. Sadie crossed her arms. Maybe. But she's alone now. Julian's out. Her friends are quiet. She's feeling it. I nodded, not sure what to say. You think she deserves it? Sadie asked, her tone sharp. I set the wrench down, wiping my hands. I don't know, I said. Not my call. She'll have to carry her debt differently, not in cash, but in her head. That's worse. Sadie watched me, her eyes searching. You're not mad anymore, she said, more statement than question. I shrugged. Mad doesn't fix it. I said what I needed to. Rest is on her. She nodded, slow, and we sat there, the hum of the fluorescent lights filling the silence. I didn't hate Camille, not anymore. I'd loved her once, poured everything into her, and she'd thrown it away. But that was her burden now, not mine. I'd walked away, not to destroy her, but to save myself. And I had. The lawyer called again a few days later, pushing the case. Last chance, Mason, he said. She's vulnerable now, perfect time to strike. I cut him off. No, I said, firm. I'm done fighting her. Let her live with it. He sighed, like I was a fool, and hung up. I didn't care. Money wouldn't give me back those years, wouldn't erase her words. I'd rather build something new than claw at her ruins. The shop lease was signed that week, my name on the door, Reed's Auto, in bold letters. The clinic program grew too, more families coming in, thanking me for keeping it real. I was moving forward, not looking back. That night, I sat on my couch, the TV off, just listening to the quiet. Camille's text glowed in my mind, but I didn't touch my phone. She'd never thought I'd leave because she'd never seen me, really seen me. I'd been her rock, her bank, her shadow, and she'd assumed I'd stay that way. But I wasn't that guy anymore. I was Mason Reed, mechanic, consultant, the guy who'd stood up and walked away. She'd face her reckoning, alone or not, and I'd face mine, building a life that was mine, not hers. I leaned back, closing my eyes, and let it go. The past was hers to carry. The future? That was mine. And it felt solid, like something I could hold on to, something real. I stood on the stage at the grand opening of Forge, my hands shoved in my pockets, the crowd buzzing below me like a hive I'd stirred up. It was a year since that night in the parking garage, a year since Camille tore my world apart, and here I was, 36, still a mechanic, but something more now. The building behind me was brick and steel, nothing fancy, but it was mine. Forge wasn't just a repair shop, it was a mentorship center, a place for young guys like I'd been to learn a trade, fix a car, build a life. The sign above the door read, Forge, strength through work, and I'd picked every word myself. Local entrepreneurs flanked me, guys who'd invested after my story went viral, along with Sadie, who'd taken on the community coordinator role. I looked out at the faces, kids, parents, neighbors, and felt my chest tighten, not with nerves, but with something I hadn't felt in years, pride. The mic was in my hand, and I cleared my throat, the sound sharp over the speakers. I'm Mason Reed, I said, my voice steady, rough from a long day. A year ago, I was working 3 jobs, trying to hold up someone else's dream. It didn't work out, but I didn't stop. This place, Forge, it's for guys who don't stop either. You don't need a degree to make something of yourself. You need grit, hands that work, and a chance. That's what we're here for. The crowd clapped, loud and real, and I stepped back. letting Sadie take over with the details, classes, schedules, all the stuff she was better at. I watched her dark hair bouncing as she talked, and thought about how she'd stuck by me when no one else did. She'd seen the truth back then, and now she was here, building this with me. The day was a blur after that. Ribbon cutting, handshakes, kids running around the shop, touching tools like they were toys. I showed a group of them how to change a tire, my hands moving slow so they could follow, and their eyes lit up like I'd handed them gold. One kid, maybe 16, skinny with a chipped tooth, said, "You're the guy from the video, right? The one who didn't quit." I nodded, wiping grease off my fingers. "Yeah, that's me." He grinned. "Cool." I didn't feel cool. I felt tired, worn, but his words stuck. People still talked about that speech, the receipts, the way I'd walked out of Camille's life. Online, it was a legend now, but to me, it was just the day I stopped being her shadow. Later, I was in the back office, sorting through some paperwork, when Sadie came in with a letter. "Mail for you," she said, tossing it on the desk. The handwriting was familiar, Camille's, and my stomach flipped. I hadn't heard from her since that text months ago, the one I never answered. I picked it up, the paper thin in my hands, and hesitated. "You gonna read it?" Sadie asked, leaning on the doorframe. I shrugged. "Maybe." She rolled her eyes but didn't push, leaving me alone with it. I tore it open, my pulse loud in my ears, and started reading. It was long, messy, her words spilling over the page like she'd written it in a rush. "Mason," it began. "I've been trying to find the right way to say this. I'm sorry, not just for what I did, but for who I became. I lost myself in that world, and I lost you. I see it now. Everything you gave me, everything I took. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just hope you're proud of who you are." I set it down, my hands steady, and stared at the wall. Proud of who I was. I thought about that, about the years I'd spent breaking myself for her, the nights I'd come home to nothing, the way she'd erased me. And then I thought about now, the shop humming outside, the kids learning, the life I'd built from the wreckage. Yeah, I was proud. Not because of her apology, but because I'd made it here without her. I folded the letter, slid it into a drawer, and didn't write back. She didn't ask me to. She didn't ask for anything, just left it there, like a weight she needed to drop. I let her have that. It wasn't mine to carry anymore. The rest of the day went smooth, more tours, more thanks from parents who said, "This is what my boy needs." One guy, a welder with rough hands like mine, pulled me aside. "Heard your story," he said. "Built something like this myself once. Keep it up." I nodded, grateful, and watched him go. The investors were happy too, talking expansion already, maybe a second location. I didn't say much, just listened, letting it sink in. This wasn't just a fluke. It was real, growing, mine. Sadie caught me later, grinning. "You're a natural at this," she said. "Bossing people around, teaching kids." I snorted. "Hardly. Just doing what I know." She shook her head. "It's more than that. You're giving them what you didn't have." That night, after everyone left, I locked up and stood in the empty shop, the smell of oil and metal thick in the air. The tools were lined up, the floor swept, everything in its place. I ran my hand over a workbench, feeling the dents and scratches, and thought about Camille's letter. She'd seen it, my strength, my worth, but too late. I didn't need her to tell me now. I saw it myself, and the kids who'd hung on my every word, in the space I'd carved out. I'd spent years chasing her dream, thinking it was ours, but this was mine. No degrees, no fancy suits, just me and what I could do with my hands. I drove home under a dark sky, the truck rumbling steady, and felt the quiet settle in. Not the heavy kind I'd known before, but a good kind, a full kind. The next day, I'd be back at Forge, teaching, fixing, building. Sadie would be there, keeping it all together, and the kids would show up, eager and loud. It wasn't perfect, money was tight, hours were long, but it was enough. More than enough. I pulled into my lot, cut the engine, and sat there, the letter flickering in my mind. "I hope you're proud," she'd written. I was. Not for her, not because of her, but for me. I'd forged something out of nothing, and it stood strong. I climbed out, the night cool against my skin, and headed inside. The apartment was still small, still rough, but it didn't feel empty anymore. I kicked off my boots, dropped onto the couch, and closed my eyes. Tomorrow was another day, another chance to keep going, to show those kids what I'd learned the hard way. You don't need someone else's stage to shine. I'd found mine, built it from the ground up, and it was solid. That was my win, quiet and real, and no one could take it from me. Not her, not anyone. I was Mason Reed, and I was proud. I stood by the lake at sunset, the water flat and golden, watching a handful of forge apprentices wrestle with an old boat engine I dragged out here for them to practice on. The air smelled like damp earth and gasoline, a mix that felt right to me, and their voices carried over the quiet, laughs, curses, the clank of tools. I leaned against my truck, arms crossed, letting the breeze cool the sweat on my neck. It had been a long day, teaching a morning class at Forge, fixing a busted radiator at the shop, then hauling this engine out here for the kids. But I wasn't tired, not the way I used to be. This was different. This was peace, the kind that settles deep, not from noise or crowds, but from knowing I was where I belonged. The kids were a mess, grease on their shirts, arguing over a wrench like it was a prize, but they were getting it. One of them, Jake, the skinny 16-year-old with the chipped tooth, looked up and grinned. "Think we got it, Mason," he yelled, cranking the starter. The engine sputtered, coughed, then roared to life, a rough growl that made them all cheer. I nodded, a small smile tugging at my mouth. "Not bad," I called back. "Now take it apart and do it again." They groaned, but they were laughing too, already reaching for the tools. I watched them, my chest full, and thought about how far I'd come. A year ago, I was a ghost in my own life, chasing Camille's dream. Now, I was here, teaching these kids to build their own. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky red, and I took a deep breath, letting it fill me up. This spot by the lake was mine, a place I'd found after everything fell apart, where I'd come to think, to let go. I'd spend hours here over the months, staring at the water, piecing myself back together. I thought about Camille a lot in those early days, her voice, her laugh, the way she looked at me once, like I was her whole world. I'd loved her, hard and deep, and I'd pictured a life with her kids, a house, maybe a dog tearing up the yard. That dream was gone now, scattered like leaves on the wind, but standing here, I didn't miss it. Not anymore. I'd let it go, not with anger, but with a quiet nod to what was. I kicked a rock into the water, watching the ripples spread, and my mind drifted to her letter. It had been weeks since the forge opening, since I'd read her words, "I hope you're proud," and tucked them away. I hadn't written back, hadn't called. She didn't need me to. She'd said her piece, and I'd taken mine. Sadie told me later that Camille was still in the city, working at a smaller hospital, no fellowship, no Julian. "She's quieter now," Sadie had said, her voice soft. "Like she's figuring it out." I'd nodded, not asking more. Camille's life was hers to live, her mistakes hers to carry. I didn't wish her ill. I never had, but I didn't any. Mine was enough. The kids finished up, the engine in pieces again, and Jake jogged over, wiping his hands on his jeans. "You coming tomorrow?" he asked, eyes bright. "We're doing breaks next, right?" I nodded. "Yeah, I'll be there. Don't be late. You're leading it." His grin widened, and he ran back to the group, yelling something about being the boss. I chuckled, shaking my head. Forge was growing. More kids signing up, more donors pitching in. The shop was steady too, Reed's Auto, a name people trusted. The clinic program kept me busy, helping families like mine had been, working folks who just needed a break. It wasn't big or loud, but it was real, and it fit me like my old boots, worn but solid. I thought about the years I'd given Camille, 6 long ones, every day a grind for her dream. I'd been the man behind the degree, the one who'd carried her to that stage. But now, standing here, I was the man behind my own name. I didn't need her validation, didn't need her to clap for me. The kids' cheers, the hum of a fixed engine, the way Sadie smiled when we locked up Forge, that was my applause. I'd built this life from the ground up, not with fancy words or a sharp suit, but with my hands, my sweat, my stubborn refusal to quit. And it was mine, every dent and scratch of it. The sky darkened, the last light fading, and I called the kids over. "Pack it up," I said, my voice carrying. "Time to head out." They grumbled, but got to it, hauling the tools into the truck bed. I helped, lifting the engine with Jake, our shoulders brushing as we worked. "You're good at this," I told him, setting it down. He shrugged, "Shy now. Learned from you." I clapped his back, not saying more. That was enough. We piled into the truck, the kids squeezed in the back, laughing and shoving, and I drove them home, the road dark and familiar. Dropping them off, I watched them scatter, Jake waving, the others yelling goodbyes, and felt that peace again, steady and warm. Back at my place, I parked and climbed the stairs, the night quiet around me. The apartment was the same, small, rough, smelling like oil, but it felt different now. full somehow. I kicked off my boots, grabbed a beer from the fridge, and dropped onto the couch. The lake lingered in my mind. The water, the kids, the engine's roar. I thought about Camille one last time, not with pain, but with a kind of distance, like looking at an old photo you don't need to keep. She'd been my world once, and I'd given her everything. But she'd taken it and walked away, and I'd found something better. Not her stage, not her spotlight, mine. I took a sip, the cold biting my throat, and leaned back, closing my eyes. Tomorrow, I'd be up early, forge, the shop, the clinic. More kids to teach, more cars to fix, more people to help. It wasn't glamorous, wasn't loud, but it was real. I didn't need headlines or crowds. I had this. The lake, the work, the quiet win of knowing who I was. Mason Reed, not the man behind her degree, but the man behind his own name. I'd fought for it, built it, earned it. And as the night settled in, I let the past slip away, final and gone. The future was here, in my hands, and it was enough. More than enough. It was mine.